Hi, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session of Chazey Partners RPA episodes. My name is Jim Jameson. I am the delivery manager for Chazey Partners, and with me today is our head of RPA globally is Chuy Michelle. Chuy, would you like to say a few words?
Hello, everyone. Super excited to be here. Looking forward for the next 15-20 minutes when we expect to share with you a lot of great content. Thank you, Jim.
You bet. And for those of you that might be tuning in to Fun with Flags with Sheldon Cooper, hopefully that is not this episode. We want to have a little bit of fun, have just a little discussion, tell us some of our pros and cons of POCs and pilots in terms of RPA. So just to kick us off first, though, Chuy, why don't you explain a little bit about what Chazey's end-to-end process is, and then we'll get into some of the myths about POCs and pilots.
Of course, James, and thank you. So when you look at RPA, you need to look at it end-to-end. So Chazey's approach to RPA, first of all, is process, right? The process approach is very important, where you look at which processes have the most potential for automation and how those processes having that potential become your business case to get the approval so you can start your automation program. In order to start your automation program, you need to go through proof of concept for pilots. If you are growing your program, then you will need a center of excellence so you can scale it and grow exponentially. We also do bot development. We have an on-demand factory for bots. And we also offer managed services, which we believe is very important once you have several bots in production. How do you watch them? How do you monitor them? And how do you track them? So in a nutshell, that's our end-to-end offering. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you. And, so the purpose of today is just kind of have a discussion about proof of concepts versus pilots. And I know that in any industry, right, software related, a lot of the vendors provide a proof of concept, right? And they come in and they do something that's just really quick and dirty, and that's usually what people think about proof of concept. And I've kind of come full circle on what a proof of concept is, because as you know, for the last several years, Chazeys offered a proof of concept, but it was a fully functional bot versus a one that you might get from a vendor that's just proves that the technology works, right? And so there's at times there's some confusion between POC and a pilot, and really I think the point of it is that regardless of what the client wants to call it, POC or pilot, as long as the requirements are understood up front. I'll give you an example. We had a city government client, right? And they wanted us to build 2 bots, and they called it a proof of concept, but everything was completely ready for production, and we put it in production. We have another county government that wants to call it a POC, and they don't want us to move it to production. They want us to provide all the documentation. We're going to go through UAT, but they still call that a proof of concept versus a pilot. Typically, if you do a POC that's not fully functional, right, for production or not ready for production, then you want to follow that up immediately with a pilot that has all the exceptions and everything coded into it, so that it does work in production. Would you agree with that?
Totally, Jim. And as you mentioned, these 2 terms, proof of concept and pilots, are used interchangeably. And in many cases, when we work with clients in pilots or proof of concepts, we always spend a lot of time, right, coming up with an objective. So what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to just test basic functionality of RPA in one of your environments when you are comparing vendors, for example? Then, if you're just comparing vendors, if you're just looking at very basic, straightforward functionality with not real data, probably proof of concept is the answer for you. Whereas if you are looking for gaining credibility in the business in order to come up with a real business case, a fully functional bot in production, then pilot is probably your answer.
Right. Very, very true. And I think the takeaway, at least for me, as I said earlier, whether you call it a POC or a pilot, I think as long as you understand what the requirements are for your POC, fully functional versus not fully functional, then you're fine in terms of terminology, right, with your client. And that brings up another good point. You know, there's a lot of myths out there regarding POCs. And so what I'd like to do right now is just kind of talk about some of those myths that we hear and actually as we've experienced, right? The last thing you want to do for a POC or a pilot is select a process that is too complex to really show a client the value of RPA. So I guess the first myth is that complexity doesn't matter for a POC, and I would say that's false. That's a myth, because complexity definitely does matter. What would you take on that?
I agree with you, Jim. Complexity matters, and it matters a lot. Actually, what we tell clients all the time, it's not all good ideas for automation become great automations. So this process work and this evaluation and assessment of the complexity associated with certain automations is critical for success. So definitely, complexity matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we have an algorithm, and I'm sure there's probably other companies out there that have some type of assessment tool, right? And I know for ours, we really look at feasibility, right? That doesn't necessarily tell you how simple or complex an automation will be, but it does tell you the feasibility of a process to be automated. And I think that's a big differentiation that you need to make when you're speaking with clients. The other myth is really has to do with funding for an RPA program or a project. As you know, funding is usually the hardest thing to get, whether it be a POC or a pilot. So in your mind, do you think a single POC is sufficient to gain funding for a new RPA initiative? Or how do you like to coach clients in that arena in regards to POCs?
If you just want to buy a license and play with a license in your computer, then probably POC can do the work. POC can help you convince your manager to spend time and to spend money in a very simple thing, straightforward piece of work. If you're trying to take it to the next level, which is really automating 3 to 5 processes and creating the foundation for a real RPA program, POCs are not going to give you enough to get that funding. Right.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I guess that's kind of why we've kind of adapted, right, to what the marketplace provides in terms of RPA. And in fact, we've changed how we approach the offering for pilots, right? We always do 3 to 5 assessments to make sure that people really get an initial roadmap, right, for their RPA journey, knowing that once you can really demonstrate the benefits of RPA, it can really be a real attention grabber and really build momentum as you build out that program. And one of the third myths is really about and we've really talked about is about process assessment, and that process assessment is not required for proof of concept, but in fact, we've already stated that, yeah, that's very important, regardless whether you do a pilot or a POC. You want to make sure that your feasibility, your complexity, your simplicity is known up front. So I guess the fourth myth that we want to really just highlight, and it's really the topic of the entire episode, is that POCs and pilots are the same thing. And in fact, they're truly not, but how you use the terminology with a client is really based on what they're used to, right? They might call it a POC, but it's fully functional. They might call it a pilot, which we obviously believe is always fully functional. And we help coach the clients in that manner. Anything additional that you'd like to talk about in terms of POC versus pilot?
I guess we just mentioned it a couple of times, Jim, which is, what is your objective? Are you trying to really create a foundation to scale a RPA program, or you're just trying to test basic functionality? And that's how you describe POC versus pilot. And at the end of the day, it's the discussion with the client in a real project that gives you the answer.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And last but not least, our fifth myth that we want to really kind of discuss is really about what verticals is a RPA technology really good for, right? Is it only good for finance? Is it only good for HR? Is it only good for IT? And I'm just going to say that it's good for everything that requires any type of manual activity. And we call this kind of like swivel chair, right? Entering data from one electronic source into another, or some type of compare and contrast, whether it be bank statements, whether it be large data volumes that need to be compared. Anything you'd like to add in terms of the verticals that RPA is good for?
Yeah, I guess you mentioned it, Jim, right? So it's not all about finance, right? So when you Google RPA, there's a lot of hits on finance. Of course, finance got a large number of transactional processes. Therefore, there's huge potential in finance. But so there's huge potential in HR. There's huge potential in order to cash, record to report, and so forth. So anything that is transactional, right? And that's the beauty of RPA, right? Anything that is transactional that requires, significant human manual intervention becomes a great candidate for RPA. And in reality becomes a great candidate for a proof of concept or pilot. And it depends what you want to do.
Right, exactly. Couldn't have said that better. So listen, everyone, we hope that you've enjoyed our little banter today. It's not intended to be a lengthy episode, just something that you can come in, hear an opinion of people that are in the marketplace, and hopefully you found this beneficial. ChazeyPartners.com. We have lots of blogs. We'll have other episodes. So thank you for joining us, and we hope that you found this useful. Have a great day.
Stay tuned.